Welcome back in Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall, a live look at Gaza. We continue to monitor this camera. I've been keeping my eye on this camera all day. I have seen a blast occasionally, indicative of the IDF continuing its campaigns within the enclave at this hour. Dr. Alon Burstein is here. Him and I haven't had the chance to talk in about a week's time. And my goodness, Alon, a lot has happened in the past week. Let's start with Gaza. In fact, that's where most of our coverage is going to bring us today. This is the first time I've had the chance to debrief with you since some countries have said that they're eyeballing recognizing a Palestinian state. That includes the United Kingdom and Canada. These countries have stipulations before they'd recognize the state, but it's important to note that they're doing this in response to horrific humanitarian conditions in Gaza. Alon, what has the U.S. said recently about Palestinian statehood? Has the U.S. said that it wants a pathway to a Palestinian state post-war? I remember the Biden administration, Anthony Blinken, saying that he wanted that. How about the Trump administration? What have they said?
Good to see you, Austin. A couple of things that are important to add to that. First of all, it's not just the United Kingdom and Canada; those are the most recent countries, but it's actually a wave that's brewing. It started with France, that said that they were going to recognize a Palestinian state in the UN General Assembly in September. And France is a big country. It's a country citizen Security Council. It's an important signal where the world is going. Since then, Malta has said that they're going to recognize the state of Palestine. Portugal has said they're going to recognize the state of Palestine. Other countries are considering it. Germany, a country that has supported Israel almost blindly for many years, has said it wants to work towards looking at a two-state solution. Now we have the United Kingdom and Canada. So it's really a larger wave that is brewing in the world towards recognizing a Palestinian state. And I also will say, before I address what the United States has said about this, that it's important to note a lot of people say, okay, but so what? The General Assembly will eventually recognize the state of Palestine. It has in the past. It's recognized the state of Palestine in a lot of ways. So what? It actually does end up mattering, because the more states that end up recognizing the state of Palestine, that means that the state of Palestine, wherever we define its possible borders, whether it's the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, all of what is Israel now, whatever it is, most countries usually define it as the 67 borders of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. If you recognize that state as a legitimate state, then Israel's presence there is an occupying force. Up until now, Israel's presence in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip at different times has been seen as disputed territory. If Israel becomes officially an occupying force, that matters greatly in terms of international law, in terms of the Geneva Conventions, in terms of how Israel can be held accountable or not. So that's why that does matter, what the international trend is. Now, in terms of what the United States has been saying, the United States has wavered a lot about what's going to be the future of the Palestinians and the future of Palestine and the future of the Gaza Strip under Trump. Again, the Biden administration was very clear it wants a two-state solution, whether it seems viable or not. That is the aspiration of the Biden administration. The Trump administration has, on the one hand, said that it wants to see the Palestinian people live in peace and security. On the other hand, it has also said that it wants to take over the Gaza Strip and own the Gaza Strip and build the Riviera of the Middle East, and the Palestinians would be exiled from the Gaza Strip, and again has wavered if they'll be allowed to come back or not come back. Then it has said that it does want to recognize that Palestinians, again, have the right to their land and then not. It's wavered. We don't have a clear perspective on what the United States is viewing with this. I will say that the Trump administration is viewing very negatively the countries that are looking towards recognizing the state of Palestine. It has already said that it may punish Canada with, toughening the negotiations on tariffs and all kinds of negotiations on trade agreements. But another thing that's very important that happened today, probably not coincidental, the State Department in the United States announced that it is sanctioning the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian Liberation Organization for violating a lot of treaties. Probably not a coincidence that happened on the same day as other countries are announcing that they recognize the state of Palestine. So the States is signaling it doesn't like this, but it's wavered in terms of what should be the future.
Why does the idea of a Palestinian state put pressure on Israel? Why are other countries looking at this and saying, the idea of a Palestinian state is a lever to put more pressure on the Israelis? Why is it, put it in plain English for us, please, this wouldn't even involve an Israeli state, of course. This is the idea of a Palestinian state. Why does this put pressure on Netanyahu?
So there's three different aspects in relation to that. And if you zoom the map, zoom the camera on me for a second, I'll use actually this map, which I rarely use behind me, to talk about this. First of all, the historic concept of the territory of Palestine goes back to the British Mandate, goes back to the 20th century. And really, that was this entire territory over here was viewed as the British Mandate for Palestine. It actually included Jordan at one point also, but for all intents and purposes, we're now talking about this area. Then the United Nations voted to partition this area in 1948, a Jewish state and an Arab state. And then the Arab leadership, not necessarily the Palestinian leadership, rejected this. Israel accepted this, etc. So one of the things that makes this very, very contentious is when people say, the slogans, Palestine will be free, different people say that means different things. Some people say that means erasing all of the state of Israel and creating the state of Palestine in its place, because that is what some elements, certainly within Hamas, would like to see. Others say, no, there is what's known as the occupied Palestinian territories, the West Bank over here, and the Gaza Strip over here, that Israel took over in 1967, that other organizations within the Palestinians, the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, and Fatah and other ones, have accepted that that will be the future Palestinian state. So when people talk about the two-state solution, that's what they're talking about. Israel existing here and a state of Palestine existing separated here with all kinds of different schemes of how these will be connected through tunnels, bridges, etc. So first of all, one could look at the recognition of the state of Palestine as an objective threat on Israel's existence, saying, well, if you recognize the state of Palestine, who's to say that you're not actually talking about all of Israel? So that's one answer. Another answer, which is far more akin, I would say, to what these states are talking about. They're talking about not a state of Palestine instead of Israel, but rather a state of Palestine alongside Israel, meaning in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, is because, again, if the state of Palestine were to come into existence, if this was declared as a recognized state with all of its rights by the United Nations, then the Israeli presence in the West Bank, the fact that Israel controls 60% of the territory under military occupation, another 20% under hybrid occupation, and Israel controls all the airspace and has its settlements there, and there's dual systems of citizenship and not citizenship, and etc., all that becomes a lot more challenging. Then Israel could be accused of occupying another state. Whereas now, this area is considered officially in the United Nations under dispute. So that's the second reason it's very threatening to Israel, because it's a big change in the status quo. The third part that you added at the end, why is it a threat to Netanyahu specifically, is because Netanyahu's government right now is a minority government. The ultra-Orthodox parties have left the government in Israel. Netanyahu does not have a majority in parliament, and really his government depends on the two most hawkish parties in government, Jewish Power and religious Zionism, the parties led by Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. They are expansionists. They want to see Israel annex the West Bank and annex the Gaza Strip. So politically, this is very detrimental to Netanyahu. If the world is going towards this direction, Israel, we're likely going to see making more and more noise. Well, then we'll go to the other direction. We're not going to accept this.
Steve Witkoff meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Witkoff is in the Middle East. Mike Huckabee is as well. He's the U.S. ambassador to Israel. Both Witkoff and Huckabee are expected to visit Gaza on Friday so that they can meet Palestinians and brief the president about humanitarian conditions within the enclave. Alon, what are Witkoff and Huckabee going to be able to see in Gaza? Presumably, it would be tough to safely bring them to the areas struggling hardest, correct? Do you have that same question as me? What will they be able to see?
To be completely honest, I put no stock in the Palestinians that they're going to meet. Because, first of all, there's no such thing as a representative sample of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and what Palestinians have undergone. And second of all, because the vast majority of Palestinians are living in three defined areas: in the al-Mawasi refugee camp, in southern Gaza, in the central camps of Deir al-Balah, and in the areas of Gaza City. The IDF almost does not go into that area because it is such a mess. So certainly Steve Witkoff is not going to go into that area. He's going to meet in other areas, and chances are he's going to come to those sites of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, to those distribution sites, and he's going to meet Palestinians who managed to get there. He's certainly going to hear about hardships. He's certainly going to hear about struggles. He's certainly going to hear about hunger, but also he's not meeting the people in the most destitute level who don't even have access to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. So I don't put a lot of stock in the fact that they're going to meet Palestinians. The importance of them coming to the Gaza Strip specifically is, first of all, symbolic. It's symbolic. It's Trump showing I care actually what's happening, and I don't just want to hear what Israel is telling me. I don't just want to hear that Israel says there's no starvation in Gaza. I'm sending my emissary. Steve Witkoff is Trump's man for everything. He's Trump's man for, I think, from Israel. He's traveling to Moscow,
Yep.
or I think to Moscow. He's going to be talking between Russia and Ukraine. He's Trump's man to everything. Sending him to Gaza is Trump saying my man is coming to look on the ground. That is to some extent a signal also to Israel saying, I want to know what's going on and I want my man there. I don't want to just hear from you. And that's the symbolic reason of that. A second reason of that is the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was really Steve Witkoff's vision. He was the one who tried to put this together as some sort of mechanism that would combine Israel's concerns and humanitarian needs, and security needs for the Gaza Strip alongside the humanitarian needs of the Palestinians. It has not delivered as much as he hoped. And I think that he personally probably wants to see what's happening there. So that's the symbolic reason of why he is going to the Gaza Strip specifically. The bigger question is what happened in that meeting. They're smiling, they're in those handshakes. I would place good money that they were not smiling when they actually met after the cameras turned off. And that's really the importance of that. The visit to the Gaza Strip, mostly symbolic.
Yeah. Witkoff, by the way, you're right, is going to be heading to Russia. We did hear today that he is going to be heading there, of course, amid negotiations to end that war as well. Where does the humanitarian situation stand, Alon? The reason why we're discussing the idea of this Witkoff visit, the reason why we're discussing nations around the globe potentially recognizing a Palestinian state is because of the humanitarian situation. There's been an unending story of, I read story after story about hungry children in Gaza. This is something that you and I have been talking about since October 7th. But this is something that's really making its way into the public's eye in a way that maybe we haven't seen before during this war. Can you describe the humanitarian situations as they stand today, Alon?
The situation is disastrous. There's no other way to put it. There are several things that contributed to this, and I get, throughout the day, I probably get at least 25 people either emailing me or writing me messages asking, who's to blame, who's at fault. You're not going to find that. This is a bloody ethnic war, and both sides have committed atrocities, and both sides have committed a lot of atrocities with regards to the humanitarian situation as well. In the current context, Hamas had stolen aid, and lots of it, when it was coming into the Gaza Strip, so they are to some extent at fault. Israel also blocked all food access from coming into the Gaza Strip between March and May, and since then has blocked most of the food that would get to northern Gaza. Obviously, it is also at fault too. The fault that most people are trying to see, why did it happen? I tend to put less stock in. I think it's very important in order to understand, but that doesn't help alleviate the starving child to know, well, who's at fault. Ultimately, what happened is, as a result of the combination of the way both sides handled this, and primarily Israel's blockade of food for over 2 months, and then stopping a lot of aid routes that would get to northern Gaza, we have had a complete collapse of the humanitarian infrastructure in the Gaza Strip. It's important to understand the levels of infrastructure that are required in order to deliver food to starving people in a war zone. The viewers should just think of the logistics that are required to get food to be in your local store. This requires warehouses, farms, warehouses, crops, all kinds of trade agreements between countries, interstate agreements coming in, then distribution routes, then there's traffic signs. You have to get your trucks to the local stores. All that happens when you don't have bombings going on every which way. We don't have militants stealing food along the way. To deliver aid to hungry people in the Gaza Strip is a massive organization and apparatus that Israel primarily has placed a lot of limitations on. And when organizations manage to get through those limitations, Hamas also ended up placing a lot of challenges by stealing a lot of that aid and blocking it. So the situation is disastrous. There are many, many starving people. Different UN reports are talking about 1 out of 3 people, 1 out of 5 people that are suffering from malnutrition. By now, reports are talking about a growing number of people that are dying from malnutrition, and then there's a lot of debates about if these are people who had other pre-existing conditions that led to that or not. Either way, they are dying from malnutrition, whether they have previous sicknesses or not. And that is the current situation. I will say that as a result of the international pressure and the fact that, as you said, all of a sudden the entire world is thinking about this and is looking at this, Israel over the last week really changed its course after stopping all humanitarian aid between March and May, and then part of its operation, Gideon's Chariots, was to control humanitarian aid. It's changed its course entirely. Right now, in the last week in the Gaza Strip, we are having paradropping of foodstuff and aid coming in throughout northern Gaza and southern Gaza. Israel has also announced secured routes for the UN to have aid trucks to deliver food to different areas in Gaza. And I would argue, most importantly, Israel has declared on its own volition that there's going to be humanitarian pauses in the fighting virtually every day in most of the different areas in the Gaza Strip where there are Palestinians between the hours of 10 a.m. and 8 p.m. in order to allow people to safely leave their homes or wherever they are in tents and actually get to where the food trucks are coming in. So we are expecting the situation to probably improve in the next week or two. But again, the logistical apparatus that is required in order for this to happen, this all happened in the last 5 days. Until this actually gets to the hungry people in the refugee camps that have been set up in the western parts of the Gaza Strip, I do expect that we'll see the situation starting to improve, but probably it will take another at least 4 or 5 days before this actually starts to take any effect.
I got to ask you one more thing before we go here. This is The Atlantic. They put out a piece recently called Hamas Actually Wants a Famine. They say within it here that Hamas wants a famine in Gaza, producing mass death from hunger as the group's final play, its last hope for ending the war in a way that advances its goals. My question for you, Alon, is how has hunger been used as a weapon in this war, and is Hamas the only one guilty of using it as a weapon?
So there's 2 different ways to look at the concept, which is actually a legal concept of using starvation as a weapon of war. Hamas benefits to large extents from the suffering of Palestinians because this ends up as a boomerang to pressuring Israel. Hamas was negotiating with Israel the entrance of humanitarian aid as part of the hostage agreement. So the fact that humanitarian aid is now coming in, and again, there's already pictures of Hamas militants taking over some trucks, not all of them, but some trucks in the areas of Deir el-Balah and in Gaza City. To some extent, Hamas has benefited from the fact that there is starvation in Gaza because then more pressure comes on Israel, and then Hamas may benefit from that politically and through materials on the ground. In turn, part of the indictments against Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant are on the charge of using starvation as a weapon of war, which is considered both a war crime and a crime against humanity. Because one of the things that Israel has done, it has said that because Hamas takes over the humanitarian aid that comes into the Gaza Strip, Israel is going to vastly curtail the amount of aid that comes in order to not fund Hamas and let it both feed its own troops as well as then use that in order to make money in the Gaza Strip. And it has also used this as a negotiation chip when it came to the different hostage agreements. Israel said it's going to limit aid, and then when Hamas actually accepts that it's going to release hostages, more aid will come in. Part of the defined and public aims of Israel's latest operation, Gideon's Chariots, was to use the fighting and the fact that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has its distribution centers in southern Gaza in order to draw the population down south. So again, using the fact that food is in one place and is being denied in another place in order to draw the population down south. So this, many international legal scholars and the ICC have argued, is also using starvation as a weapon of war. Israel has argued in turn that, well, Hamas takes over the aid, so it's not actually using starvation as a weapon of war. It is stopping the other side from getting control of aid. Like I said, both sides end up being guilty of a lot of atrocities in this. At the end of the day, when you have starving children, and starving people, this is where a lot of people are expecting the United States to come in and say, it may be your fault, it may be your fault. At this point, it doesn't matter to me. At this point, we need the situation to change. And again, I think the symbolism of Steve Witkoff coming in to the Gaza Strip is Trump saying something has to give here. This isn't working, and I want my emissary to come back to me and explain what's going on. I think that's where we are in this.
So, for those of you who didn't get enough of Alon and I these past 20 minutes, we recorded a whole nother conversation earlier today. Specifically, we looked at the turnaround of Hamas's leadership in recent years. Today marks 1 year since Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated. Alon and I had an in-depth conversation earlier today. We're going to be uploading that on our YouTube channels tomorrow. So take a look at Alon's personal YouTube channel, or you can find that on the LiveNOW YouTube channel tomorrow as well. Alon, as always, good to see you. We'll talk with you soon.